Hello, students, and welcome to Writing Workshop. We are going to begin our work today, and we are in Lesson 4. So let's take a little bit of a look at what our objectives are for today. Today, we're going to be looking closely at finding information on these topics. First of all, we're going to be learning about the writing process. So one of our questions in our learning guide today is, we're going to find out, and I want you to tell me, what are the 5 steps in the writing process? Secondly, we're going to be learning about what things do informational texts have in them that lets us know that they are an informational text. And then in box 2, what are some examples of informational text? By the end of this lesson, you will be able to identify at least 3. Question 3 today, our objective is to understand what are the 3 main parts of an informational text. And lastly, we're going to be asking the question, do you think the mentor text we've been working with, titled Girls Think of Everything, is an informational text? Yes or no? And then I want you to explain your answer as to why or why not you think this. Make sure that you answer in complete sentences with capitals and punctuation. So those are our learning objectives for today. Let's take a look at some of our lessons here. First of all, in order to understand the writing process, let's take a look at our anchor chart. Let's review what the writing process actually is. Looking here at the left, we see the first part of the writing process is what we call pre-writing. Now that we know what it's called, what does it mean that we will do? Well, during the pre-writing stage, this is where you're brainstorming and thinking about your topic and how you can organize your ideas. All of that is considered pre-writing. Then we move on to the second phase, which is the draft phase. Now, during a draft phase, this is when you use your ideas to write down a rough draft of your story. So that's where you're going to be writing sentences, listing facts, and turning them into sentences that we can then organize into paragraphs. After you've done your draft, it is what we call a rough draft because it's not finished. The second thing after that is we're going to revise. Revision means to revise something. We always revise after we do a draft. This is an important step because this is where we look closely at our work and we make changes to improve our writing. ARMS, ARMS. This stands for arrange, remove, move, or substitute words in your sentences to make them better. After you've done revision, then we come down to editing. Now, editing is where we do proofreading and we correct mistakes that we notice. We think of CUPS, or cups as we call it. This strategy helps us remember to check for capitals, underlined words that we need to fix, P, check for your punctuation, and S, check for your sentences. After you've worked through the editing process, that's when we finally get to our publishing stage. Publishing stage is when we write and share our final copy. That's our writing process. Now, let's focus on the other objective today, which was to learn about what is an informational text and what parts does it have. An informational text generally has 3 main parts. It has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Let's look at an anchor chart. This informational text anchor chart shows us not only what the parts are, but what they mean. So here we have introduction. What would we put in our introduction as we begin to write informational text? Well, first of all, it says we want to write something that will hook our reader. So a sentence that hooks our reader. Sometimes we call this the hook. Our introduction also must include our central idea, or as we also know it, our main idea. The second part of our informational writing will be called the body. Our body is what supports the central idea with facts and details. We need to make sure we give reasons and examples. Lastly, we must use an organizational strategy. For example, we might decide to work in chronological order, or we might add information details that support our main idea. The conclusion is at the end. Conclusion is a fancy name for the end of our writing, and it restates our central idea, and it also leaves our reader with a thought. Informational texts always have a purpose. That is, the author wrote it to inform us. We inform people by describing things, people, or events. We also inform people by showing sequence or the order things happen in. We can compare things. We can show cause and effect, or we could show a problem and its solution. Now that we've covered informational text, its part, and also the purposes that it has, let's talk about what would be some types of writing that would fit in this category. Some types of informational text might be found in a newspaper. A newspaper article is written for the purpose of describing people, places, events, and this would be an example of an informational text. Another type of informational text could be your textbook for science, your textbook for social studies. These kinds of books have the purpose of informing the reader with factual information. Those would both be examples of informational text. What about a true book of a famous person's life, such as Michael Jordan? We would call that a biography. Biographies are written about lots of famous people. A biography does share information that is true about a person. Therefore, a biography is also considered an informational text. Other kinds of informational texts could be encyclopedias, informational websites, recipe books, and how-to manuals. One important thing to note about an expository or informational piece of writing is that generally in the very first paragraph, in that introduction paragraph, we will find a thesis sentence. A thesis sentence is the sentence that the author writes to declare their main idea, their central idea, or the purpose for their writing it. After the main idea sentence, it's organized by paragraphs, and all of those paragraphs that come after that introduction should be filled with details that support the main idea or the thesis. Now we're going to look at our text, Girls Think of Everything, and listen to a story about one more inventor and their invention of the paper bag.
Margaret E. Knight. Paper bags. They're used every minute of every hour of every day by millions of people in thousands of stores across the United States and throughout the world. When she invented a machine that made flat-bottomed paper bags, Margaret E. Knight not only revolutionized the paper bag industry, but she forever changed the way people shopped. No longer did they have to pack their milk, meats, and cheeses into heavy wooden crates. No longer did shoppers struggle to stuff jam and bread into bags shaped like envelopes. With the flat-bottomed paper bag, life suddenly got a whole lot easier. Margaret's job at the Columbia Paper Bag Company was relatively simple. She needed to gather, stack, and tie the company's finished bags into neat bundles. Regular bags were made by machine, flat-bottomed bags by hand. She had been at work barely a week before the idea came to her. I had plenty of leisure time for making observations, Margaret said, and such time was employed in watching the movement of the machines and the manufacture of square-bottomed bags by hand. Why did flat-bottomed bags have to be made by hand, she wondered. It was time-consuming and very costly. Few customers could afford them. Margaret was told there was no such thing as a machine that could fold and paste flat bottoms. This seemed odd to her, since the flat bottom was clearly a better bag. Margaret had no formal training in engineering, but she had been working with or around machines, in cotton mills and manufacturing plants from her earliest memory. In fact, as a child, she much preferred a jackknife, gimlet, and pieces of wood to dolls and other such toys. She began by making drawings of her ideas. Next, she constructed a cutting tool that she called a guide finger, and created a folding tool from a piece of tin that she called a plate knife folder. The result? A successfully folded square-bottomed bag. My next experiment was on one of my machines in the shop, to which I rigged these same two devices, my guide finger and plate knife folder, she explained. By this means, the paper tube followed along the guide finger, entering it and flushing it back over the plate knife folder. I did succeed in folding square bottoms. Once she established that a machine could, in fact, fold and paste square bottoms, Margaret was more determined than ever. A year after her initial idea, she successfully built a wooden model about 2.5 feet in length and 1 foot wide. In July of 1868, I then completed making it a perfect working model, stated Margaret. I should say that I made thousands of bags from it. She then hired a skilled machinist to build an iron version, which she needed to submit along with her patent application. Unfortunately, and unknown to Margaret, a man named Charles Anon saw her machine in the shop while it was being cast in iron. He copied it and tried to patent it as his own. Determined to set the record straight, Margaret went to Washington, D.C. with her diary, patterns, photos, records, models, folded bags, witnesses, and her lawyer in tow to fight Annon's claims before the Commissioner of Patents. Been to work all this evening trying the clockwork arrangement for making the square bottoms, Margaret writes in her diary on Saturday, March 9th, 1867. It works well, so far so good. Have had enough for one day. If other parts work as well, I shall be satisfied. After 16 days of testimony, she won. The invention of the machine that makes flat-bottomed paper bags was acknowledged as Margaret Knight's, and she was awarded a patent in 1870. She joined forces with a business partner and established the Eastern Paper Bag Company in Hartford, Connecticut, to manufacture her machines. She also set up a lab where she worked on other inventions, amassing a total of 27 patents, and and prompting the media of the time to dub her Lady Edison. Margaret Knight's paper bag machine remains a milestone in the history of mechanical engineering. It's remarkable that during this era of high-tech gadgetry, a simple paper bag has remained a staple of everyday life. So shoppers, toss some more chips and salsa into your cart. Your bag will hold them. Although Margaret's invention has stood the test of time, she didn't get rich. Reportedly, she was offered $50,000 for her machine, the equivalent of more than $500,000 today, but turned it down. It was noteworthy then that at her death, her estate was worth a mere $275.05.
Okay, students, so now remember you're going to go to your Google document, Writing Workshop Lesson Guide, and you have four questions to answer today about what you heard and what you learned in the video. Make sure that your answers are written in a complete sentence. That means it has a who and a what, a subject and a predicate. It tells a whole idea and can make sense by itself. Also, writing rules. You need capitals and you need punctuation. Be sure you turn in your work when all steps are finished.